So here we go. Right, hello and welcome. It's Marilyn Devonish here from transformationstm.com, and this is the Ask Anything webinar, and it does what it says on the tin, but let's get started and give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today and what you can expect on this webinar. So the Ask Anything webinar is based on something that I do every month as a bonus session for my Facebook membership group, my online membership group, which is called Think Tank Thursday, or as many people call it, Think Thank Thursday. For some reason, myself included, we always mistype it. I don't know why, but Think Tank Thursday. And so people can ask anything they want, and I do a Facebook Live and just answer their questions. And so the premise is very simple. You ask, I answer. That's it. No more, no less. So that's really kind of what it's based on. The premise also of the Ask Anything, lovely friend of mine, some of you might know Tracy, wonderful, fantastic, phenomenal woman, and this is something she does for her clients. And so I thought, actually, I know I've been doing it for the last, at this point, 2.5 years, every single month for my membership group. I've never really run it as an open session before. So this is a bit of an experiment to see how it works. Do you find it useful? Do people enjoy it? And so the idea, and that's what Tracy calls hers, it's the Ask Anything session. So I've borrowed that from Tracy Lee Lawrenson. Thank you, Tracy. And just thought we'd have a play today and have some fun with it, and we'll see how it goes. So in terms of today's question, just so you know what we're going to be talking about, if you've just come in and haven't checked the copy, this one is about how to get stuff done, because that's a question that is asked a lot. So when I said I was doing this, people are like, I don't know how you manage to do the amount of stuff that you do. How do you get things done? So that's what we're going to be talking about today on this webinar. So we're going to come back to that. And what I want to do is just first of all give you a bit of background, a bit of context, a little bit about who I am, also a bit about you as well, and then we will get started. So my intention for this webinar, number one, is to, whatever your questions are, because they'll be different if I do a series of these, they'll be different every single webinar, but it's to help you shed some light on whatever that particular issue, challenge, question happens to be. It's also to give you alternative perspectives, different paradigm and premise from which you can look at the particular challenge. It will give you also additional points of view, maybe, because sometimes when you're in your own head, you are just in your own head. And when you're in the eye of the storm, you sometimes can't even think straight. So this is to give you points of view, and also to provide you with some food for thought, as I like to call it, like a smorgasbord of things to choose from. And I know some of my friends say that talking to me is like enlightenment central, in terms of they will always come away with those wonderful, as we call them in photo reading, aha moments and light bulb moments where it's like, whoa, how come I didn't think of that? And I always say one of the reasons why you didn't think of that, and it's something my economics teacher used to say, maybe I'll explain this one in a later webinar, but for now I'll just say it as he said it. Sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. We'll leave that there for now, but that might be another one that we expand upon. So this one is to really just open up the space and give you some alternatives. So that's kind of the intention for this webinar. That said, for those of you who have ever attended either an in-person workshop with me or a video webinar training, you probably have seen this slide, and it's one that I first saw when I went out to Hawaii to study Huna back in 2005. And the saying is, think not that all wisdom is in your school. And I just loved that saying. And I think as a trainer and as a presenter, as a coach and consultant, even a parent, a friend, a confidant, when you get that into your head, it's like, oh, relief. And so what I'm sharing with you, alternative perspectives, viewpoints, food for thought, it doesn't mean that's the be all and end all. It doesn't mean that's the only way. It's not a case of my way or the highway. Not all wisdom is in this school. However, I'm going to share with you some information, thoughts, perspectives that have helped me in that particular aspect in terms of whatever it is we're talking about. But that doesn't mean it has to be the be all and end all. And there'll be a variety of other ways and means that you can achieve what you want to achieve or do what you want to do. So I say, if it resonates, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. If it doesn't resonate, that's fantastic. That is wonderful too. So just wanted to share that one with you as well. Now, in terms of the format for this session, I'm going to focus on one submitted question, and then we are going to take a question from the audience as well. So if you have a burning question, and actually this will be a good time for me to tell you about the logistics for those of you who are here live, you've got the chat, which is, as it suggests, if there's just you wanted to give some feedback about something or make a comment, that's the chat. There's also the Q&A, and the Q&A, I would say if you have a question that you want to submit that I'll talk about after we've talked about how to get stuff done, put that into the Q&A, because it's going to be easier for me to filter through them rather than having to scroll through all of the chat. And so on this webinar, we're going to do 2 questions as opposed to 20, because on Think Tank Thursday, there can be anything up to 20 questions, and I'll just sit on the video and just answer them all. So we're not going to do that long a session today, so we're going to be concentrating on 2 questions in terms of our format. So first thing I would like you to think about, the invitation is to find out a little bit more about you. So why are you here? What would you like to learn or take away from this webinar? As I've already said, do you have a burning question? If so, put it into the Q&A. And what would make this kind of valuable and worthwhile use of your time, such that we get to the end of the 30-40 minutes, however long it will be in terms of the question you have, once I've done my bit, is kind of what would make that valuable for you. What would you really kind of go, oh yeah, that was good use of my time? And you can share and use that in the chat. You can use that in the Q&A. I don't think we've got a big time lag on this, so I'm just going to grab some water, and I think in the time it's taken me to have some water, if there's anything you want to share, put that into the chat, and then we will get started. Okay, that's cool. So one person says just interested. I always like that. Somebody else similar, I think we've got a similar theme, was curious to see what it was all about. Absolutely. And I do love a bit of, as we used to say back in the day when I did my NLP training, wanton curiosity is always a good thing. Okay, got you. So sorry, there was a word missing, so I had to skip back. So it said, haven't got a question, but was here for some stimulation and maybe we'll think of one later. Absolutely fine. So keep those coming and we'll kind of move along with the agenda for today. Now, a little bit about me for those of you who have never met me before. As I said, my name is Marilyn Devonish. And in terms of corporate background and where I've done this a lot in terms of, you know, you just have to think on your feet and get on with it and just answer people's questions on the spot. I've been working as a management consultant since 2003, so a long time now. Also at that time qualified as a Prince 2 project manager. That's a term that maybe if you're familiar in the UK and you work in central or local government, you'll be familiar with. Also worked as a change management consultant, also a smart and flexible working specialist, which means you're going into, and mainly I work in central and local government in terms of the consultancy side. And you're going into those organizations and helping people work more flexibly. So when we started doing this back in 2003, we did not have the technology that we have today. Now it's commonplace for people to work from home and work from anywhere and work from satellite places. There are organizations around the world that specialize in providing entrepreneurs and business owners with temporary accommodation and office space. Back then it was pretty much unheard of, and so the premise of that back then was taking people who were entirely office based, and often they've been working in an office, the same office, for 20 or 30 years, and then transitioning them out of that so that they could work remotely and so that they could work from home. And it's not just the practicalities of that, there's also the mindset piece to that as well. So actually that might be a question for some of you who are watching. If you are entrepreneurs, I know oftentimes people ask about, you know, how do you work from home, the discipline of it, strategies for it. And I'd say over and above all of that, there's a real big mindset piece as well. So if that's of interest, feel free to formulate a future question around that. Also work as a corporate trainer, an executive coach and workshop facilitator. So going into organizations, speaking to their teams, listening to the challenges, and then designing workshops, away days, coaching interventions, coaching programs, leadership development trainings, you name it. Probably done it over the last sort of, what are we now, 15, 16 or so years. So that's kind of the corporate side and where I spend a lot of time doing what we're doing here today. And then there's the other me, which many of you who are my clients will know, and actually you probably don't know about the side that I've just talked about, and that's the side who is into the personal development side of things. So I'm a practitioner, master practitioner and trainer of NLP, hypnosis and timeline therapy, also a certified life and executive coach, and have done a number of different things in terms of modalities: EFT, DNA theta healing, Huna, access consciousness, emo trance, archetypal profiling, you name it, I've done it. Of course, photo reading runs as a massive thread through that in terms of everything I went through with the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. So there's a lot that goes on there. And for me, it wasn't a path that I had planned on. It's one of those things that found me because I was studying to be a chartered accountant and pretty much just took a week off in order to learn how to improve my communication skills and presentation skills, because I was terrified of public speaking and could barely even talk to my own family. So that's the other side of what I do, and been doing that since October 2000. So that's that. I also write for newspapers and magazines, often on the topic of health and emotional well-being, but also write for kind of accountancy magazines, kind of business publications and that sort of thing. So again, the having to come up with answers to questions or put something succinctly in 500 words, which might be somebody's whole life, because I spent 7 years with Spirit and Destiny magazine. I was an agony aunt and wrote a monthly problem page. And so I love the idea of questions and coming up with, as I've already said, the food for thought, alternative perspectives. And what I will say, one of the reasons why I am passionate about personal development and corporate development is I know it is possible to change, even when you think you are stuck and steeped in something, and it's just the way you are in terms of your personality. Because that was what you're seeing on the screen now, for those of you who are watching rather than listening. I was shy, lacking in confidence, very low self-esteem, sabotaging myself left, right and center, physically and emotionally drained. I was sleeping 12 to 15 hours a day. And the way I described it, I felt as though I was living life as a spectator. I was on the outside looking in. And that was my life until the age of 32. And within literally a couple of days, everything changed. And so it didn't do a Lady Gaga. I wasn't born this way in terms of loving speaking and sharing, presenting, doing workshops, speaking on camera. It was something I learned, and that's why I absolutely know it's more than possible to do all of the things that we're going to be talking about, both today and in the series that's kind of coming up. So let us get to today's question, which is how to get stuff done. And thank you so much for this question. And what I've done is I've broken it down into 10 things that I would say are useful and key components in that scenario and in that equation. So, number one, it's a mix of big picture and detail. And what I mean by that, and I might even go as far as to say a mix and a balance in terms of big picture and detail, is one of the things I've noticed. People are either head down, in the minutiae and in the kind of the real detail of it, and pretty much watching their feet every single step of the way, or they're way up there and what we would call they're away with the fairies. And if we talk about it in esoteric terms, we would say that somebody is ungrounded. If we talk about it in corporate terms, we would say that they were scattered and head in the clouds. So it's that. So when I say it's a mix of big picture and detail, what I'm saying is it's good to have a focus on both of those things. So you're not too far one way, you're not too far the other. There is a sense of balance. And then when you've got that, you can be thinking both of the long-term planning and what needs to be done in the immediate. So that's the first thing I would say about how to get stuff done. Number two, and it's something that one of my very, very early mentors, a guy called Mike Littman, said to me. And this was probably, oh my goodness, 2003, 2004, something like that. I signed up for an online coaching program with him. And so every week at about 1 o'clock in the morning, because he's American. I'm of course in the UK. Well, not of course, I am in the UK, for those of you who don't know. And so I would dial a number, pick up the phone receiver, dial the number, and be on this live sort of telecast with Mike. And one of the things that he says, you don't have to get it right, you just have to get it started. Now, he said it slightly differently. That's my English version of it. And he talked about there, so I get goosebumps when I think about this one. He talked about there, he has had a best-selling book called Conversations with Millionaires. And he also had a radio show. And he said when he first started the radio show, he was sitting every show basically talking to himself. He didn't have any listeners. He then said he'd persuade his mum to be a listener, so at least there was somebody here. Then his mum would get a few of her friends to listen, and then he had this idea about interviewing millionaires and would be in conversation with them. And again, when he started off, the audiences were pretty small, and gradually over time it grew. But he said in terms of starting the show, writing the book, creating the coaching program, he said if he had been thinking about it and got to get it right and got to do this and got to do that and and what we call over here crossing the T's and dotting the I's, the likelihood is nothing gets done. And that's one of the ways, for those of you who do kind of follow me on social media or who are on my e-newsletter list, you will know that I churn out and put out a lot of stuff. There's a lot of coaching courses, there's a lot of trading courses, there are a lot of programs. I'm trained in about 20 different modalities in terms of the personal development and qualifications list as long as your arm in terms of the academic. I did a business studies degree, I did a postgraduate marketing diploma with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, had a teaching certificate, the various qualifications in terms of the management consultancy and the project management. The list is long. And even with that list, before I got into personal development and started taking charge of my own mind, you'd think from now till Christmas and get nothing done. And in terms of being able to put out that much content in terms of myself, the writing, the blogging, the courses, the social media updates, the being in groups, helping other people out, it's because I took this approach and thought, you know what, I don't have to get it right, I just have to get it started, and I can course correct and adjust as I go along. So I'd say for me, that's been a massive one that's made a huge amount of difference in getting stuff done and getting things out into the world and in the hands of the people that I want to serve. Number 3, this is what I call my 3 for 3 or 3-4-3, if that's an easier way for you to remember it. And this one is, I'm thinking, and this kind of relates to number 1, I'm thinking of what can I do in the short, medium, and long term. And if I have both of those things in play, and over the course of a week or the course of a month or the course of a quarter or every 6 months or the 12 months, whatever your planning window is, if you can do something for the short term, the medium term, and the long term, it means that you're kind of doing stuff in the now and plowing things forward and actually sowing seeds for later. And that has been a wonderful way where then something that I call the cumulative effect will kick in, and you will look back and go, wow, in terms of what's been done. So it means that your focus isn't just on the every little step, nor is it too far ahead. We're now getting into the practicalities of saying, I'm going to do something every week, month, quarter, half year to be moving myself along. And if you think of it then in terms of short, medium, long term, that can really help you as well in terms of your strategic planning. The 4th thing I would say about this question about how to get stuff done is start from where you are. And the analogy I use to my clients with this one, because I think it really helps people get it, is if you had to take medicines, or if you were taking vitamins or even food, you wouldn't take it all in one go. If somebody gave you a prescription or you bought a bottle of vitamins, you would know it would be crazy to sit and take all 30 vitamins in one sitting. It's like, of course you wouldn't do that. You'd look at the back and go, well, take 1 a day or 2 a day or 1-3 times a day, whatever it is. Yet for some reason, people don't take the same approach with doing stuff. They think they have to, have everything in place and have, accomplished everything and done everything. It's like, you know what? Start from where you are with the resources that you have available to you and go and grow from there. So that'll be my 4th tip in terms of things to think about. I would also say number 5, which is kind of related, is go for iterative growth rather than the if you're now let me just pre-frame this one. Everybody's different. So when I was saying about think not that all wisdom is in your school, that's one of the things I'm talking about. If you are an all or nothing person and that strategy works for you, all power to you. Continue to do that. That is absolutely amazing. What I'm talking about here and what I'm addressing here is if your strategies aren't working and you're not getting stuff done. I would say if you've gone for the all or nothing, and sometimes the all or nothing can work in as much as people will say to themselves, oh yeah, I don't want to just do a bit, I want to do it all, so I need the perfect time, and then the perfect time often doesn't come. And so that's what I mean also about the all or nothing, where sometimes you're taking that approach, that means nothing gets done. So if that strategy isn't working for you, I would say go for iterative growth. What I mean is appreciate that everything doesn't have to be done at once. And doing something, I would often say to my clients, is better than doing absolutely nothing. Doing a little bit is better than doing none. And if you take that approach, now this also then comes back to, you're going to have to be less hard on yourself, because people are sometimes a little bit harsh in terms of the way that they speak to themselves, the way that they think, God, I'm so lazy, God, I'm useless, oh, I'm this, I'm that. And when you're doing the iterative approach, rather than trying to get everything done at once, there comes a point where you might have to be kinder to yourself. But, you know, the iterative approach, I would say, is a bit like, I guess when I was growing up, the analogy that I would leave you with on this one is the hare and the tortoise. It's that basic premise and story. And that's basically what I'm saying here as well. So that'll be kind of number 5. Brilliant. And actually what I will do, let me have a read of that. I can just see the Q&A bubble is on. So let me do that and have a bit of water. Yeah, so in terms of the question, in terms of the approaches I'm talking about here, can I use them both for personal life and business? Yes, absolutely. It's not about a particular field. I'm thinking kind of more in terms of work and getting things done in projects. However, it lends itself to a variety of things. So, and it might be that all of them don't lend themselves to it. It might be that first one, oh my God, yes. And the second one, yes. And the third and fourth, not really. So, but yes, you can cross apply this to both your working life and your personal life. Absolutely. So let's go on to number 6 to 10. Now, this one is key. I would say assess what you have the capacity for. And this touches a bit on social media, because social media, I love social media. I mean, my nephew, it's a bit embarrassing. My nephew is like, Auntie Marlyn, calls me Auntie Marlyn. Auntie Marlyn, you're on Facebook more than I am. And that, for a teenager to say that to you, it's like, oh dear. I love social media. And one of the other sides of social media is that we see things through a lens. We see things, a little microscopic view of someone's life. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking everybody has got more than you, and everybody has achieved more than you, and everybody is doing more than you. And that's often not the case. And so I would always say, rather than making just straight off comparison in terms of you should be there and you should be doing that, and how come you haven't achieved that, and how is it you're doing that and they're not doing that, which can then paralyze people, because they then think, well, there's no point now. It's almost like you feel hopeless before you've even started. The thing I would say to remind yourself of is think about, what do you have the mind for? What do you have the infrastructure for? What do you have the energy for? Because we all have different mindsets. When I say infrastructure, I'm thinking in terms of what systems do you have in place. So for example, there's something I do called future life progression, a bit like timeline therapy, but slightly like timeline therapy, but different, if you know any of those therapeutic approaches. And so I often share the story of my client who I took out into the future. She saw a process which made absolutely no sense to her at the time, but I was scribing, I was making notes. I'm old school, I normally have a pen in hand, and we recorded the session. So I wrote down everything her future life was saying. A couple of weeks later, we did another session, and she's really excited. She said, I ran a workshop this weekend and I made 100K in a weekend. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. She says, I came up with this fantastic new process. I'm like, really? Tell me all about it. As she starts describing the process, I'm sat there and I'm thinking, I have heard this before, pretty much word for word to the letter. So when she finished, I said, let me read you this. And I got my notebook. And again, as I said, I'm old school. So I normally have a black and red notebook, 2 hands, where I keep my client notes. So I got my notebook, I opened it, I started reading to her. And she was like, where did you get that from? I said, you told me, you said it. When did I say that? I said, in the future life progression session. But what I always say to my clients, look, she had the infrastructure for it. She's already running courses. She already had a mailing list. She already had clients who were attending workshops. So the infrastructure was in place. She also then had the presence of mind to allow that download into her psyche. And then she had the energy to deliver that content, to build the program around this weird idea that she had and put it into practice. So if you don't have the same infrastructure, if you don't have the same level of energy to bring something to market, your results might be different. So I'd say, what do you have the capacity for? Go from there rather than saying, hey Tracy, oh Tracy, I hope you don't mind, I mentioned you on this webinar as being one of the inspirations for the taking the ask anything approach. And Tracy says, any sort of baby steps for those of us that are super disconnected from anything that is more esoteric versus fiercely pragmatic. Oh, and she says, I'm a delight. Thank you, Tracy, you are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I would say it's a really seriously, and you might have to just like give yourself a little slap on the wrist, like, come on now, just focus on me, never mind the others, because everybody is so different. And Tracy says, I'm leaning into this because of you, but find myself being skeptical. Tracy, that is so cool. Seriously, I'm telling you, if there's a saying that comes to mind, it was let go or be dragged. And it just makes me laugh. I often say it to my clients, but on that personal development training where I literally thought I was signing up, I thought I was signing up for a communication skills course, and I got all the materials in, and it said NLP, hypnosis, timeline therapy, Huna. I was straight on the phone and I tried to get a refund because I said this, I was studying to be a chartered accountant at that time. And I said, this isn't what I've signed up for. I need a refund. I don't want to do this. It's not my thing. I think it's all rubbish. And they said, come to the training. If you don't get massive value from the training, at the end of the 7 days, we'll give you a refund. So now I'm mad as hell, because I'm like, not only have you got £2,500, that's £2,500 for us in the UK, and probably close to $3,500, something like that, depending on the exchange rate. So I'm like, not only have they got £2,500 of my money, you're now going to make me waste 7 days of my life sitting, listening to BS about hypnosis and timeline therapy, whatever the heck that is. So I'm mad as hell. And I get there, for the first 3.5 days, I basically sat at the back, head cocked to one side, face like thunder, eyebrow raised, and at every opportunity my hand went up to ask a question, because I'm now looking for my out. Because I'm like, when I go to you on day 7 and I tell you this is rubbish, I'm going to be able to pick holes in everything they've said. So that's why I'm on a mission to, sorry, how do you mean this? And what do you mean about that? And how does that work? And I must have been I know I was a complete pain in the ass. And then suddenly on day 3.5, it was a tipping point. I'm like, I'm here now. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what they tell me. I'm going to play full out. I'm going to prove that it's rubbish by jumping in with both feet, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Tracy, and for anybody else who might be thinking the same thing, I could not have been more skeptical about the whole thing. Seriously, I couldn't have been. So I hear you, I get it, and what can I say? That's it, really. That is totally it. And I don't think you were here. Just 1 second. I don't think you were here with this bit. And then what I did is I ran in parallel. I ran the corporate side, going into central and local government. And Tracy, you will know more than many here how different that is in terms of a modality. And I ran that simultaneously with the other me, where I was then doing all my weird and wonderful stuff. So, but I totally get it. I was not a convert. I wasn't the least bit interested. And I was like, you guys have lost your mind if you think anybody's going to pay you for this. So it was an interesting one. And again, that also comes back to the, what we're talking about here with the mind, the infrastructure, and the energy. If you don't have that for a particular thing, and this is a slightly different take on it, but there we come to the thing about I guess the word everybody uses today is authenticity, where people will pick up on that and you actually don't even have the will to get stuff done. So where I'm talking about the mind, the infrastructure, and particularly the energy, if you don't have the energy for something, and it's something you're at choice with, that's when I'd say to people, look at what you're attempting to do and ask yourself the bigger why. Why are you trying to do this? What is this about? What will this get for you or allow you to do? And that will take you deeper into your ultimate motivations for doing that. So number 6 has a lot going on in terms of that. There's one I call do the one thing, and I'm going to, with this one, I've got it planned as something that I'm going to do for the membership group for Think Tank Thursday. So I'm going to leave that one for now. And you guys in the membership group, we'll talk about it in more detail, but it's kind of a key piece as well, but one that can be expanded on in a really big way. Number 8, I think this is one is so important. Celebrate all achievements and steps and successes, no matter how seemingly small they might be. Now, I think if you're looking at a screen rather than listening and doing some other stuff, you'll notice there's a water drop. If you look behind me, I don't know if you can see on the shelf up there, I don't know if you can see it particularly clearly. Let me grab it. Just give you a better view of it. So that's a replica of what you can see on the screen. That's my business card. And these are the brochures that I designed back in 2001. Can you believe that? It's about the water drop logo. And with regards to the water drop logo, it's what we call the ripple effect. And I was saying with regards to the ripple effect, anything, you can throw a tiny pebble into a pond and it will ripple. You can throw a big rock and you get a bigger ripple. But oftentimes, and it's like that saying that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. I've noticed, particularly in my kind of coaching and therapeutic work, we're back to the all or nothing in a way. If people don't get a big result and exactly the result they wanted in exactly the way they said they wanted it, they're all upset and disappointed. And they're not noticing what I call the green shoots. And I says, look, if you don't notice those green shoots and celebrate them, it's going to make whatever you're trying to do so much more hard work. Whereas when you have these little mini and micro celebrations, that gives you the energy, the impetus. It gives you a hit of serotonin and dopamine. And that is one of the things that can carry you through over and above those who are kind of depressed, falling at the first hurdle, and it's noticing those small achievements. So I always say, look, when you've taken a step closer to where you want to be, when you've achieved something, even if it's a little thing that you've ticked off your to-do list, your online list, Trello, Aura, whatever it is you're using, if you take a moment to give yourself high five, thumbs up, pat on the back, do a happy dance, you feel good, and then you have the energy and the momentum to keep going. So celebrating those successes, regardless of how you quantify them in terms of size. And I have to be honest with you, I'm not going to bore you with it now, we'll be here all night, but there are so many times where something seemingly small and insignificant has happened, and it has been a major catalyst for something else that unfolded and happened and transpired. So don't assess something in the moment. And this brings us very nicely to number 9, Steve Jobs. One of the things I'm always saying to my clients is one of the things that Steve Jobs said is you can't join the dots going forwards. What that means is I cannot see where this moment is going to lead us. You can't. You just can't. So if we go back to what I said with number 2, Mike Littman, you don't have to get it right, you just have to get it started. Mike could not foresee in that moment where he was sat doing a radio show, talking to himself because he had no listeners. There's no way he would have in that moment seen that it led to a best-selling book where he's interviewed all of these millionaires. So remember that it's only with hindsight that you can kind of assess something, see how far you've gone, see how it's kind of measured up, how it shaped up, what it led to. And so I would always say, keep that one in mind, particularly if you are in a place and a space where you can't even make sense of what's going on, because hindsight is definitely a wonderful thing. those clouds often do have silver linings, not to go too heavy on the platitude route. But you seriously, I mean, and yes, I do things like future life progression and timeline therapy, where you go out into the future and then you see what's going on. And if any of you, I don't know people like Paul McKenna, for example, the woman who I trained with future life progression, Paul, for example, went out and saw the titles of those best-selling books, brought them back into now and wrote them, and those are partly one of the reasons why he then left the UK and had a big show in the United States of America. And many UK celebrities dream of breaking America. Not many of them are able to do it, and he's one that did it, and he saw the titles of those books in his future life progression session. So yes, there's that. We can go out and see a bit of the future. However, in terms of our day-to-day, we just done this thing, we don't always know how it's going to end up. And I think some of my clients will roll their eyes when I say this, but the P word, patience, is also very key as well. And then the final one I want to share with you in terms of answering the question of how to get stuff done is failure versus feedback. And this is one of the things I was taught in October 2000 when I was sat on that personal development training with a face like thunder, plotting how I could get my refund. And they were saying there's no failure, there's only feedback. So take the feedback, learn from that, and as I'm always saying to my clients, then decide what, if anything, you need to do differently, you want to do differently, you choose to do differently, move along from there. And there was another saying that they were always going on about, feedback is the breakfast of champions. At the time, I really didn't think so, because I saw feedback and criticism as the same things. Now, that was basically due to my personal upbringing, not as in terms of the way the world necessarily operates, but I wasn't particularly happy about that one. However, I've come to know that that is true. So in terms of getting stuff done, if we go back to, you don't have to get it right, you just have to get it started, and doing the 3-4-3 that we talked about in the previous slide, if you then did that and it didn't work the way you planned, you go, okay, it's fine. It didn't work the way I planned. You might even say it failed. Now I'm going to look at that and I'm going to take the feedback. Okay, what did I do? What happened? Let me go through that steps. What did I learn? What would I do differently next time? And one of the things you might have learned is this is not for you. And another thing is, like, you might think, this is totally for me, and I need a better strategy here, and I need a plan there, and I could do this here. So I would say, and even when things don't go right, learn from that, take the feedback, decide what you're going to do differently, and then move along from there. So that will be my summary on how to get stuff done. So my question then is, number one, the next thing is, do you, any of you, because I'm going to take an audience question as well. I'm going to do, so what I will do if I ever run this again, and I'm playing with the format, but my thinking for this one is one question that I've had in beforehand that I prepare for and do what we've just done, and then a question that I take from the audience. So if any of you have a question, you can put that into the Q&A if you have a question, and I will answer that one here as well. And then if there are more than one, what I'll do is I will make a little note, and I will do that in future Ask Anything sessions. So while I'm having a bit of water, I'll give you some time to do some typing if you have a burning question, and I'll answer that as well before we kind of bring it to a close. And we have just have a few things to share with you with regards to next steps, and a few things in terms of how to implement what we've talked about. Okay, that one says no question, but interesting. That's cool. As I said at the beginning, interesting, food for thought, alternative perspective. That's where we're at. I'm really happy about that. That's very cool. Let's see. Okay, let me flick there as well. Actually, hang on. Sorry, scrolling the wrong way. So I was going to say, I've seen that. Just make sure. Actually, do you know what? When Tracy was talking about lean in, Arianna Huffington, in terms of, and actually it does fit a bit with the being skeptical about this stuff. One of the things I love about Arianna, she's written about many of these things, but in a very pragmatic, business-like way. So one of her, she often talks, she's one of the people, because a lot of people are talking about it now, but she is also one of the people who talks about leaning in. But one of the things I loved about her book, the latest one that she brought out, probably about 2-3 years ago now, was she wrote a whole whole piece, and it runs with a thread through it, the power of intuition. So I would definitely say that is a good one, because I would say intuition and what I call divine inspiration is a really big part of it. Hold on. So what's the baby step to work with you for those whose inner child voice is a whiny baby? I love that one. Right. So in terms of, that's a nice bit. I did see the other one about Huna, Huna, but that's going to take us off on a slightly different tangent. So what I might do is do a future Ask Anything about Huna. This one, I think, in terms of the inner child being a whiny baby. The thing, with regards to that, and I would say actually you're kind of lucky. My inner voice was destructive and hateful and mean and nasty and cruel, and I had that inner voice right up until the age of 32. So I'm going to share with you what I did with mine. In amongst that might be some fun things. I'm also going to share with you, there was something that happened also at Skiros. I was teaching on a Greek island. It's written Sky, Skyros, Skyros, but it's pronounced Skiros. And I was out there for a month. I was running relationship workshops and life coaching workshops. So I'm going to talk to you about the Skiros thing as well, because that might also be useful. So and I think the reason my inner voice was so just awful to me is because I was awful to myself, and I hated myself, and I hated other people as well. Now, understandably, when one has been abused from the age of 7 to 17, that's a whole other story as well. But when you grow up in that kind of environment, you have very low opinions of self-esteem, self-worth, and my inner voice, I think, brought into that whole scenario. When I did the personal development training, I was then offered a job as one of their coaches and trainers. So that's one of the reasons I became a trainer of NLP, is I was then running NLP practitioner courses, master practitioner courses, and teaching NLP, hypnosis, and timeline therapy. And I went from in May 2000, knowing not even what NLP stood for. I did the practitioner in October 2000, the master practitioner in November/December 2000, and in January 2001, I started working for the NLP training company, and I'm doing what you call running the room. So I'm in charge of a team of coaches, many of whom had been studying NLP for 20 years. And there's me, literally wet behind the ears and totally green, who's come from nowhere, and suddenly I'm in charge and I'm running the room. And there are a few people who were resentful about that, and I totally understand why that is, because some of them were thought they were in line for that job and didn't get it. So now they find that they're basically working for me, this girl who doesn't know anything, allegedly. And I also bought into that. And I remember when I first started working for them, we were running the trainings, and I'd be getting headaches, I'd be getting migraines, I was literally throwing up. And there was one particular day, there's a guy called Paul Vernon who was showing me the ropes. I'm lying under a table. There's 65 students in the room. They're doing some exercises. I'm lying under the resource table. We had a long tablecloth. So I'm lying under the table, doubled up, because I'm so sick. Every once in a while, I would crawl from underneath the table, run to the bathroom, throw up, come back. And I'm walking back and I'm like, what the hell? And the inner voice is saying, well, what the hell do you think you're doing here? Who do you think you are? What do you know compared to all these people who've got so much experience and And I was like, please, not now. I've got to work. I've got to focus. I cannot take it. Can you please go and sit on the shelf and I will talk to you later? And in my mind, I had this very clear image of my wooden bookcases, and the inner voice at that moment looked like Humpty Dumpty. So round body like an egg, little legs that dangled, little arms and a face. And literally the inner voice went from in my head, and it sat on the shelf in my living room, even though I'm in London, I'm in Kensington. So it sat on the shelf in the living room, and I says, if you've got nothing useful to say, I will come back and talk to you later and we can have a good conversation about this. But if you haven't got anything useful to contribute right now, can you please go and sit on the shelf? As the voice went and sat on the shelf, and I actually had a day of peace. I'm on the train, and I just went to recline back on the train, and the voice in my head said, what do you think you're doing? And I went, huh? And it went, where do you think you're going? And I went, what do you mean? It says, you said we're going to talk on the train. And we're on the train. So I was like, all right then. So this is, of course, going on in my head. So I'm sat on a commuter train from London to Watford. So I'm sat there and I said, okay, what do you want? And this is no word of a lie. The voice went, Nothing. And I went, well, why are you always bothering me? Don't know, really, just like to talk. At this point, I don't even know if I laughed out loud, but at this point, I'm like, so let me get this straight then. You've been the bane of my life for the last 32 years, and you don't really want anything. Cool. Now, I knew some NLP, you know, there's things like swish patterns and submodalities, belief change, and all sorts of cool, fancy stuff that you can do to get rid of the voice. But I was like, hold on a minute, this voice has power. It has ruled over me for the last 32 years. Let's just say 28 years, because I'd say for the first four or so years of my life, I don't really consciously recollect that much. And actually, I don't recollect huge amounts from the age of 7 because of the abuse, but but I still remember what I was still conscious about my life then. So I was thinking, this voice has absolutely massive amounts of power. What would happen if I use the voice to my advantage? And what would happen if I use the voice to help me rather than hinder me? So I said to the voice, I says, look, we got a couple of choices here. I could get rid of you because I know some cool stuff now, but I kind of like you. I like your style. I like your tenacity. I like the power that you have. And I actually like the way that you think, even though the thinking thus far has been directed against me. So, and at that time, I was just coming out of the early onset Alzheimer's stuff as well. So I says, how about this? If I'm ever stuck, if I ever need help, support, if I ever need ideas, if I ever need information, if anybody ever asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, can I rely on you with your speed and your agility to go and find the answer and bring it back to me? The voice went, yeah, I could do that. And I said, okay, when we're not doing that, what do you want to do in the meantime? Because there's stuff I need to get on with, there's stuff I need to focus. And it's like, well, I could help you focus. I'm like, oh, cool. And so I know this is going to sound completely crazy. This is the God's honest, hand on heart truth of the matter. This is exactly how it went down. I was like, okay, cool. So we now had an agreement. So we're working in partnership. So and there are times where he would just sit on the shelf if he's like just hanging out, and other times he wouldn't be on the shelf, and then I was aware he was inside of me, and it was a he. I don't know why it was a he, but Tracy, you have seen this in evidence in the group, because you will know I could be in the group, a question will come up, or I could be on a webinar where we're kind of looking at a deal, and somebody can ask a question. I could be straight in there with a thought, an idea, an answer. You've also, so you guys who are in my membership group, you will know on Think Tank Thursday, you can literally rock up and ask me anything, and I can probably come up with 20 or 30 ideas. That isn't down to me necessarily. That is also down to what used to be the angry voice. Seriously, I'm not kidding you. We set up a shuttle, like a relay system, and now it just works like clockwork. And even in the time it would take me, if I'm on client site, let's say, big job, high powered, lot of pressure on, because with the consultancy work, when I was working with a team of consultants, we'd take on projects where we're initiating something department wide for the whole of the DFT, the Department for Transport. They run the transport system in the whole of the United Kingdom. We'll be doing stuff for HO and Treasury Department, ODPM, the Office of Deputy Prime Minister, you name FCO, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. These are the people who handle all of our security, national security. So we'll be doing quite big, well, very big stuff, with millions of pounds and millions of dollars at stake. And then there'll be me, what I used to call little old me in the room, and I'm fielding and answering all these questions. How does that happen? Particularly when I don't know your business that well. I might have just been my first day on the project. Now, number one, of course, photo reading helps with that tremendously. And so does the inner voice. Because if we wanted to go esoteric with it, one of the things I believe and know to be true is that the inner voice is also a lot more, how can I say this, esoteric and spiritually connected than I am. So stuff that my tiny mind might not have conceived of, that voice will come in and land things just at the right time. Tracy says you are both creative and generous with your ideas. And Tracy, a lot of those ideas come from that voice. where we just basically sat and we had a chat, we had an agreement. Now, one of the things, if we talk about Skiros, the island in Greece, one of the things that there was a woman, seriously, I totally remember where I was. So I'm standing there, I could see, because you had different groups. So you had the kitchen group and they were shelling peas, runner beans. So they're all sat around in a group. Then behind me, you've got the table layers. So they're laying the tables, because Skiros is a big community. So you go there to literally just let everything go. And it's about connection, it's about community. So you have a team that does the washing up, and a team that prepares the vegetables, and a team that lays the table, and a team that does the cooking, and yada yada, you know, so there's all these teams. And she comes running up to me and she says, Marilyn, the thing you said in the coaching workshop today, she says, I have the voice of my mother in my head, who is always berating me and belittling me. And so I said, well, here's a little game we can play, because we're literally just walking into dinner. I said, whose voice do you really like? Whose voice gives you a tingle? And she laughed and she said, Barry White. And I said, tell you what, so for the next 24 to 48 hours, every single time you hear your mother's voice, turn it into Barry White. She's like, okay, I'll do that. So the next day now, I'm walking through and I'm on my way up to the magic circle where I was running my workshops. She runs up and she says, oh, Marilyn, she says, I nearly got thrown out of yoga today. And I says, what do you mean? She says, I kept laughing. And it's meant to be silent and serious and the breathing and the Vipassana and all the rest of it. I said, what happened? She says, every single time that voice tried to speak, I could just hear Barry White singing to me. She says, but now I've just been laughing all day, which was a lovely break state. And so her question was, how do I tone it down? So I said, just change the volume. But seriously, you can play with, and now from an esoteric point of view, it's called submodalities, where you change the characteristics of the voice. And there are things you'd say, is the voice internal or external? Is it loud or soft? Is it fast or slow? Is it your voice or someone else's? Does it have any other characteristics and traits to it? So does it have color? Does it have texture? Is there a visual that goes with it? If there's a visual, is it black and white or is it in color? Are there any sounds that are associated to it, or any sounds that are important? And you can just go through the whole gamut and range of the senses. And I kid you not, even people who don't believe in this stuff, there's a form actually, have I got the form here? Let me just see. Sometimes, oh yes, I do actually. It's just so you know I'm not making it up. This is a form that I got in October 2000. It's a submodalities checklist. And so some of the questions I've just been reeling off are on this checklist. And even somebody who doesn't believe in I hear voices, the list will be full and they will describe that inner voice like it's a personality. And they're shocked, because this is something you do in a moment. You don't think about it with your conscious logical mind. It's just like, go, answer this, answer this, answer this, answer this, answer this, and you just whiz through those questions. It will give you the personality of the voice. And then what you do is, we call it a submodalities beliefs change, or a mapping across. So what I did with her linguistically is I took the characteristics of the voice that she had, mapped them over, overlaid them with Barry White. And so now that voice has literally been wiped out, if that makes sense. But that is basically one of the ways you could change the voice. And also, if it's internal, you can move it outside of yourself. And now you can, and so you almost become an observer of the voice. So there are so many wonderful, crazy cool things you could do with it. And the thing I would have to say with this one is, you have to take a leap of faith and play with the ideas. Just kind of go, do you know what? I'm just gonna have a laugh. I'm just gonna have a play. I'm gonna, tell the voice to sit wherever, and it might go and sit in your office or on a train or whatever, but just play with it. And in terms of adjusting the sounds, that will be a really good one to do as well. How do you test the results for photo reading? That's a very interesting one. For myself, and it really only started with myself, first of all, I was diagnosed with what was thought to be early onset Alzheimer's in my 20s. I was studying to be a chartered accountant. I went from, when I did my business studies degree, I worked full time, and I was doing a full-time degree. And I was still, I think I was something like it's either 0.7 or 1.7% away from getting a first-class degree, because I would just be burning candle at both ends. I went from that to sitting in my accountancy exams, bearing in mind, when I did my business studies degree, accountancy was one of my favorite subjects. I went from that to getting 24% on an exam, because I was reading something 15 to 20 times. I would still have absolutely no recollection of what I'd read. And so for me, there were a couple of pivotal points that made me go, this has gone beyond mere random chance. One of those things was when I did my NLP trainers training exams, 5 months, I did it in May 2001. So it was 5 months after I'd done my last accountancy exam, closed book exam, 8 hours. 8 hours, that's a long, they'll let you out to go to the bathroom, but you have to bring your own lunch and all the rest of it. 8 hours, I was finished that exam in 3 hours flat. The only thing I did differently was photo read. Now, when I did my practitioner training, apparently there was like, who is this Marilyn Devonish? She's either lazy or stupid, because it was one of the worst tests they'd ever seen. I had 2 months to do that test at home, open book with all of the tapes, and there really were tapes back then. Still couldn't get it together, couldn't get my head around it. I had 2.5 weeks to do the master practitioner test, which was humongous in comparison. And I was still doing my accountancy studies back then. And because the training I was on, excuse me 1 second. Because the training I was on, the guy who was running it, somebody had said to him, how do you remember all of this stuff? Because he's quoting names, dates, facts, figures, you name it, and he's on stage and just reeling it all off. And this was at the point where I had the Alzheimer's thing going on. And my doctor had said, look, there's nothing I can do for you, Marilyn. The only thing I can do is I would give you a medical certificate that will, and hopefully the ACCA, that's the accountancy body, can give you extra time in your exams. And that's exactly what he did. So I had a medical certificate from them, and I do have a picture of it, because sometimes people go, oh, you're making that up. So he's on stage reeling all this stuff off. And somebody said, how do you remember all this stuff? And he said, I read 20 to 30 books a month. Now, my brain, I said to the woman who was sitting next to me, I didn't really know her that well at the time, her name is Gina. I said, well, he obviously doesn't get out much, because who reads 20 to 30 books a month when you've got a full-time job and you're pulling 15 to 20-hour days? Because that's really what we did with the Pratt trainings. And somebody says, oh my God, how do you do that? And he says, I photo read. And I thought, oh my God, I've really struggled with this practitioner test. By then, I'd halfway through made up my mind to come back and do the master practitioner 2.5 weeks later. I saw the size of the test and I was like, holy crap, what am I going to do? And I thought, you know what? And they're still here. I keep them for nostalgia purposes. Let me see if I can hold that up without them all falling. These are the tapes that I had back then. This is the old version of the photo reading home study course. And I had these tapes at home. I bought them 2.5 years prior. Didn't listen to them because I just thought, what a load of bloody nonsense. I spent a couple of £100 on them, but didn't listen to them. Listened to one. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back. I've got 2.5 weeks, plus I'm doing my accountancy studies. I am going to spend the first couple of days just going through the tapes, learning how to photo read. 2.5 weeks later, I went back, I handed in that master practitioner test. They assigned me the same coach, a lovely lady called Marianne Diaz. They assigned me Marianne again because she was the most experienced coach. And my test was so bad last time, it took massive amounts of remedial work to just get me up to speed. So they assigned me the same coach. Marianne, very strict as well, doesn't take any messing about. It's a 2-week course. It takes them just over a week to mark the test because they're massive and it's all, you know, handwritten. And there's over 100 questions. Every single person got their tests back with corrections except for me. Now, I put a goal in my future timeline that I was going to get my test back. It's going to be 100% correct. There's no work to be done. All it says is good job in the corner. Everybody got their test back. The only person on that training that had no corrections was me. And it said something like, well done. I've still got it upstairs to this day. It says something like, well done. And I was like, do you know what? Well, how did that just happen? Then when I did the trainer's training exam, a lot of people were still writing at 6 o'clock and didn't finish. I was finished in 3 hours. And they said when they looked at my exam paper, again, it wasn't who is Marilyn Devonish, she must be lazy or stupid. Now we flipped to who is Marilyn Devonish and did she cheat? Because they couldn't understand how I'd finished so far. I was the first person to finish. And how, when they read my paper, it was like looking at the textbook. So now there's a discussion about how did you do this? How did she do this? I did go to the bathroom once. Somebody followed me to the bathroom. They stood outside of the cubicle door. So even if I had stuff written on my arms, I would have to be a super reader to read it in like 3 minutes, however long it takes to go to the bathroom. And so they just had to concede that I've passed. And when I had things like that happening and my medical certificate at that time was still valid, that's when I thought there's got to be something in this. And over the years, I've had clients with brain damage who have reversed their brain damage, people with dyslexia, people with dyspraxia. And so I can't sort of point you to a scientific study that said 2 points that, nah, I can't do that. But I can bore you from now till Christmas with humongous lists of people who have had the same or even much more spectacular results than I have by just photo reading. And I mean people who, there's one guy, a police sergeant, he'd failed his police sergeant's exams 3 years in a row. His bosses had said to him in no uncertain terms, maybe you're not sergeant material. The younger boys are coming up through the ranks. Maybe this isn't for you. And he knew at that point he'd be relegated to being what we call a Bobby on the beat, where you walk the streets, like you guys in America, the cops that walk the precinct. So he came to see me with, well, he had 4 weeks to spare. He was busy for the first 3, so he had a week before the exams. He had an hour and a half, that's all he could afford to do, both in terms of time and money. And so I did a super fast version of photo reading. And he went off and did the exam. He phoned me up and he says, Marilyn, I want to thank you. He said, I've been terrified of doing my exams for my entire life, and you have shown me I can do exams. He said, I actually enjoyed the exam. So he said, I've got no idea how I did. I just want to thank you. Great. 6-7 weeks later, another message from him. I ring him back. He said, I've got my results. He says, not only did I pass, I was in the top 25 percentile for the entire country, not just his region, the entire country. I always get goosebumps when I think about him and some of the others. And so when that happens, it's like, oh man, people have struggled. They have failed. And within a couple of hours and a couple of days, if people are doing the full workshop or the online webinar version, they're passing stuff, they're doing it with ease. And so that for me is my big barometer about how powerfully it works. And there are some studies in the photo reading book, which is sat on the shelf behind me. But yeah, it is sometimes I just think it's like freaking magic, but it's just really, really cool. What's the similarity between photo reading and speed reading? I would say they're both vehicles. If we think about, I don't know, a Ferrari and a Ford, they're both cars. Their aim is to move you from A to B. One of them will do it a lot faster. So with speed reading, you're getting up to speeds of about 1,000 to 1,500 words a minute, which is fast. That's brilliant. And with photo reading, we start at 25,000 words a minute, and we are photo reading a whole book from start to finish in about 5 minutes. And so they both have the same aim of speeding things up. And I would just say that photo reading is kind of a supercharged version of that. And it's not so much built on strategy and technique and process. It's much more photo reading. The whole strap line for it is called whole brain, whole mind learning. So it's how to access all of your brain, how to access all of your learning styles, of which there are I would say there are 4 that we are consciously aware of. There are another 2 in terms of the olfactory and the gustatory that people don't give that much stock to, but they can be really powerful depending on how you learn and how you process information. And then we overlay that with the 8 multiple intelligences, and that's a theory that was put forward by Howard Gardner, and it's a theory I've always been convinced it's the same theory that Sesame Street used, because if you watch Sesame Street, they use all of the learning styles, and they basically tap into Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences like clockwork. And to this day, I can still hear myself counting with the count, and I can hear the ABC song, because I believe that they also use this same technique, which is one of the reasons I think Sesame Street is so successful. I would love to interview them one day and find out if that's the case, or if they just stumbled on a formula that just happened to fit with science. But I would say, so they both have the aim of speeding you up, but photo reading is exponentially faster in terms of starting at 25,000 minutes. The same guy I've mentioned, Paul McKenna, funnily enough, he's also a photo reader. And there's a thing in the photo reading book where he was photo reading at speeds of up to 1 million words per minute, then took a comprehension test and scored over 70%. And so it's phenomenally fast in terms of the photo reading, and so are our brains. And so it's really about learning strategies that enable you to do that. So hope that answers your question. That is cool. And all right, just because I've answered the other questions, and now the person who asked about Huna is probably pulling a face now going, well, you've answered the others, so let me come back to the Huna question in a nutshell, because I'm sure you've got other things to be doing today. In a nutshell, Huna is an ancient Hawaiian healing methodology, works with symbols, works with energy, centered around the breath. So if you've ever been on one of my teleseminars or webinars or workshops, and I've been doing the Huna symbols, or you've been at a talk, you might have been at the TCCHE event where I've done little mini segments of Huna, and you would have heard from some of those 550 people. They all had a different experience, but very profound. People saying pain had disappeared, clarity of thinking, back pain was gone, hot flushes disappeared, headaches were gone. We went from confusion to clarity, and I only did like 2 minutes. But the thing you've heard me doing, where I'm doing the is what I'm doing is I'm drawing the symbols on the breath, and I'm delivering the symbols on the breath. Huna is said to date back 35,000 years. It's about self-empowerment, and it basically encompasses a lot of the esoteric and personal development studies that we kind of know of today. And there is a whole thing about the correspondences. There's almost an A to Z of Huna magic. And for me, it's been one of the most powerful modalities that I use with my clients, because I can use it remotely as well. So I can send Huna to a client in Australia. And even if they have no idea what I'm doing, because, you know, I've got permission to work with my clients when something comes into my head that I think needs clearing, they'll email me and go, did you do Huna today? Oh my God, and then they'll share this profound experience. So in a nutshell, that's what it is. And what I might do is one of these sessions about Huna where I expand on it a little bit more. Would someone who speed read well see a benefit? Absolutely. And I think for me, one of the things that I've loved about photo reading, because it's about your expanding your brain, I can now hear an advert in my head. When I was growing up, I don't drink. I'm like 90% water with the odd glass of fresh juice. And I do have a glass of champagne at New Year's. But we had an advert called Heineken, and Heineken refreshes the parts other beers cannot reach. That was the strap line. One of the things I found about photo reading is people find that it expands their brain. So they don't necessarily have to go back and reread and relearn everything they've ever read in their entire life. But what happens is they make better and stronger neurological pathways. And so now you become a font of knowledge. And funnily enough, one of the people that really put this profoundly into words was a guy, he was a barrister. So our version of a lawyer, and you've got the solicitors and you've got the barristers. The barristers are the ones who appear in court. And so he was a head of chambers. It had his own chambers in London, did the photo reading workshop. And he said, Marilyn, he said, it's like having Google for my brain. He says, when the judge poses a question, it's like I can bring up everything that I've read, pull from the material and just deliver exactly what they need. And we did a 6-month mastermind group, and he had said in one of the groups, he said, I think I want to look at shipping law. It's not my area of expertise, but I just want to know more about it. He says the next day, somebody from another chambers called him up and says, do you do shipping law? I've got a guy who's looking to take on this case and he'd like someone to talk with, blah, blah, blah. So my client says, oh, I've just been thinking about that. Send him in. He doesn't know this guy is an expert in shipping law, and he's looking for someone to collaborate with. So my client photo read 2 or 3 books on shipping law the day before the meeting, turns up to the meeting. He just did it for fun because, you know, I set them home play every month. He sits in the meeting with the guy who's been in shipping for over 20 years, knows the law inside out. My client is sat in front of him quoting statutes. It was held that, new pieces of legislation, nuances that this guy hadn't even thought of. Halfway through the meeting, he says to my client, oh, I didn't realize shipping law was your area of expertise. My client just smiled and said, oh, I've read a few books on it. Basically, he just photo read a few books the day before. That's how freakishly profound it can be, because what it does, it stimulates your whole brain, because it's about stimulating the left and right. It's about re-stimulating neurological connections that are there that maybe you haven't used for a while. It's about creating new neurological connections in a more structured, purposeful, intention-driven way. And what it does is it gives you access to more of your brain. So you have a depth of knowledge which will astound people, where they're like, bloody hell, how do you know that? That's what I hear a lot. It is just crazy the way it works. And so it definitely would benefit you if you already have some of those skills. I would say it takes it deeper. And the analogy I would use, and this is really not a joke, I would say Neo in the Matrix, where it's almost as though you get plugged into something, and whereas it might have taken you several weeks, months, even years to get something, you can get yourself up to speed in sometimes a matter of hours. And Tracy, I think you've seen this in action when I get a new tool. It's not like I'm brilliant with I'm not a technologist, I'm a hypnotherapist. But you will know from that group, people are, I get private messages, I get emails, oh, Marilyn, can I ask you about this? Marilyn, can I ask you about that? Marilyn, what do you think about this piece of technology? Marilyn, what do you think about this piece of software? Marilyn, what do you think about that? And one of the reasons I can get the software at 6 o'clock and be using it at 7 is not because I'm a genius. We all, actually, no, I am a genius, as are you. Everybody watching this has genius potential. I have just learned to tap into a bit more of mine. One of the reasons I can do that is because of the photo reading. And with Big Marker, this webinar platform that we're on, I bought it, I think I ran my first webinar 12 hours after I purchased the software. Tracy and I will both vouch for this. There are people who bought the software. I bought it in August last year. If you're watching this in real time, it's now May. There are people who bought it at the same time as I did. They're still thinking about it and still trying to figure it out. 12 hours, I'm like, I'm in. What do I do? Boom, boom, boom. And that's because of the, the photo reading brain. So, there's a lot that can go on there. Brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much for the questions. For those of you, I can see the list is kind of extended. So for those of you who are here, if there's anything that you wanted to throw into the mix before you bring it to a close, speak now or forever hold your peace, as you say over here. So any final questions about anything we have touched on during this webinar, let me have them and put them into the Q&A. That's going to be the easiest place for me to search for them. That'll be fabulous. And while you're thinking about that, just a couple of final things in closing with regards to next step. Just a few suggestions. Number one, implement what resonates. If it resonates with you, we're back to think not all wisdom is in your school. If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. Whatever. There's a load more stuff in the world. Number two, polite request. If you are sharing this information that I've given you some thoughts and ideas, like, oh, that's really cool, feel free to share your source. That's me, so that other people can come and kind of have access to the same information. That'll be wonderful. And one of the things I always say to my breakthrough coaching clients at the end of a session, whether that's telephone, Skype, or in person, I'm often saying, notice what you notice. What you can see on the screen, I created a coaching card deck last year. The Money Oracle card deck has just come out 2 weeks ago, and this is one of the cards, and I've included it in both of the decks because it's pivotal in helping people open up and view and explore the world. So what it says on the card, Tracy says, thanks so much, have to run. Thank you, Tracy, for your questions and for joining me and for the idea of doing this as a more open forum. Have a wonderful rest of your day. So one of the things that I've been saying to my clients since the year 2000 is notice what you notice. And this simple phrase will heighten your awareness of what's going on around you. And it will be one of the things that enables you to have even greater positive transformation and change. So when I talked about the Steve Jobs as one of the things in terms of getting stuff done, if you were coming in later to the webinar, then you might want to rewind when I do the replay. But one of the things about the joining the dots, and you can't see the dots moving forwards, when you're in this place of notice what you notice, also it relates to the failure versus feedback. It means that you're more open. It means that you can see what's going on around you. It means that you can spot the iterations, you can spot the course corrections, you can get that gift of hindsight a lot sooner, and that then gives you that sense of resilience and bounce back. So really, really powerful in terms of just a way of being in the world. So that's one of the things I would definitely say. Also, in terms of a closing thought, number one, take action, always a good thing. And for me, it's not just about action for the sake of action. I say take divinely inspired action. So, and what I mean by that, if we come back to it, for those of you who are there earlier, when I said people often it's like the light bulb moment and the aha moment, and the picture I had for that was almost like a kind of shaft of light coming down from the heavens. Knee-jerk reaction, action for the sake of it. Yeah, sometimes you just got to get stuff done. But other times people are kind of taking action for the wrong reason. They're taking out of fear and anxiety. So it doesn't always end up the way they'd like it to. When you have that place and that space where you're still and you're centered and you can take divinely inspired action, that right there is an absolute powerhouse in terms of, you know, moving things forward. So I would definitely say that will be my closing thought. Let me just double check and go into the Q&A. 1 second. No, you're welcome. Someone just saying thank you for, you're most welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Somebody else said, yes, definitely lots of food for thought. Good, my work is done. That's absolutely cool. And if you are watching this and you have a question for a future Ask Anything or Think Tank Thursday for you guys who are in the membership group, because I will answer all of your questions there rather than just picking a couple. Just want to say, first of all, thank you for joining me. Let me know if you'd like to ask anything in a future webinar. If you would, these are my details on the screen. So the email for those of you who are maybe listening to this as an audio rather than watching the webinar, it's marilyn@transformationstm.com, and that's MARILYN at trance is TRANCE, as in hypnotic trance, formations, F for Freddie, OR, MAIOTNSTM.com. So transformationstm.com. The website is transformationstm.com. The worst way to get hold of me is by phone, because my phone, 9 times out of 10, my phone is actually switched off. So it's switched off now so that it doesn't ring during the webinar. If I'm doing a telephone session, I'm on the phone. And if I'm doing a Skype session or running a webinar training, the phone is switched off. And on social media, it's basically /Marilyn Devonish, except for Instagram, where it's the NeuroSuccess Coach. So just want to say thank you for joining me. Hope that you found it useful. And if you want any further information about any of the wonderful and weird things I do, feel free to get in touch. Yeah, cool. Thank you for joining me for the first Ask Anything session. I've enjoyed it. Hope you found it useful. And, you know, by all means, you know, drop me an email. You'll find me on social media. Let me know how you found it. If you've implemented any of the things that I've said, love to hear how you got on with that as well. That'll be wonderful. Perfect. Right. Brilliant. Well, let's stop the recording just to make sure we've got that done and we can put that into process. And we will draw the webinar to a close. So thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.